What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Fresh off a sandbar in the Colorado River, this is the CFF All Access podcast. And my gosh, do we have a pretty eventful Memorial Day going on, right? What do we like in the offseason? We like news bites. And what do we have from the SEC meetings? Apparently, according to Ross Dellinger, Greg Sankey spoke to a group in Destin before SEC meetings began on Tuesday and said that the SEC will be holding conversations this week about the possible implementation of college athlete availability reports leading up to games. Now, us in the college fantasy football community, this is one of the great white whales of our entire existence. We've been waiting for, it's almost comical how many times we have, begged for college injury reports, but with this becoming, pretty much it's a professional sport now. Here we are. They've agreed to the revenue sharing. This is happening, at least in the big conferences, the P4, and with the Power 2, with SEC leading the way potentially. If they enact this, I think we see the Big Ten follow suit almost immediately. Any thoughts on this amazing development potential, gentlemen?
Well, okay. Well, clarification question. And this just came out, so I haven't read anything extensively on it. Wouldn't this be the same thing as what the Big Ten did this past year? Because they had availability reports.
They had availability report. Was it standard? Was it universal?
Every team. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Every team released them 2 hours before or something like that.
Oh, phenomenal. Well, then that would be them falling in line. Gosh, I'd forgotten about that. It's the off season. Here we are. Does that trickle down to the Big 12 and the ACC?
I would think so. I mean, I think they would have to follow suit, considering, whatever, more than 2/3 of the G5 eventually, or P4 is going to be in the Big Ten and SEC anyways. This is great precedent for the future of the sport. I definitely think from a P4 perspective, we see all of them follow suit at some point. So this is awesome, man. Good news. I didn't realize that until you brought it up tonight, Eric.
Yeah, well, it's hot off the presses. It just only came out 2 hours ago, according to that tweet. So the fact that it's even on the table, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. Hopefully, as the other meetings come through for each additional conference, that becomes an issue. With college fantasy, I mean, the importance cannot be understated, obviously, because most leagues, I think, right now have the kill switch option of the auto sub. So at least we have the auto sub possibilities, but there are circumstances where you would like to know somewhat ahead of time about what's happening, because you would, make decisions based off of that and maybe not play somebody. When it comes to college football player props, I'm interested how you feel about this, Mike, right? Because I've been kicking this around a little, and there are some drawbacks, because I feel like if you do the extra work, and if we're out there scouring the message boards, which we tend to do, and try to at least see what's happening according to beat reporters, though, I mean, God, we all know we've had our problem with beat reporters not divulging information until after kickoff. But with this coming out, it standardizes everything. And as soon as they come on, I would think this is going to be shifting props markets dramatically as soon as we get these.
Shifting or eliminating some players from the board entirely, because just from my off the cuff example, just think of the bowl game last year, which we between UCLA and Boise State, right? And there's the reports that are coming out that Ethan Garbers is working with the twos, right? And that was reported by, the beat writers, and that was all over Twitter. But obviously FanDuel is not really, they're not scouring Twitter for that news. But you have this availability report where it's going to specifically state that Ethan Garbers is questionable. He's going to get removed from the board immediately, where, we had time in that span to attack his prop and hit the unders. So just, from a college fantasy aspect, this is all for it, right? We want the injury reports, but I can see where this could be a not so great news for us and the college player props. God forbidding we still have them this season.
We'll still have them. I'm pretty sure, especially after this. I mean, I would be pretty surprised. And peer-to-peer gaming have been taking steps to try to protect that market, because if they don't offer it, something onshore at all, even if it's, the Prize Picks or the underdogs, if they aren't offering it, then the offshore markets are going to find a way to have it. And it'll be a case of, do you want that revenue? We'll see how that all goes. I do think we have a long way to go in that department, but I completely agree.
I loved how one of the top comments under that Ross Dellinger report was, this news is brought to you by FanDuel.
Yeah.
That's where this is heading.
Right, exactly. I mean, the hypocrisy. They'll take the money, won't they? All the schools, they'll all take the money, but God forbid if we try to enjoy ourselves on a Saturday, of course. But Nanny State's gonna nanny. I agree, though. To tie it up before we go and move on, we were able to find edges. Those edges are important. Now, we'll still be able to kind of get that information earlier in the week. It's just, and most of our betting that we're doing anyways is going to be on Thursdays, Fridays, upon open, typically on those Tuesdays, Wednesdays. So those markets, I mean, they can't be affected at all. We're talking about 2 hours up to game time, but, edges are edges. And if something comes out, it's going to kind of standardize it to the point where the books will probably even hold off some of the closer offerings until they get that injury report. So we will see how that all transpires. We'll see how the meetings go, and then how it cascades down to the rest of the P4, but probably won't bleed in the P5. But that's where we're at on that front, and we're approaching our very first break. I will try not to get too excited about it like I did last time. All right, Josh, why don't you take us?
Yeah. Well, tonight we are talking about 2024 team schedules. And so, man, why do schedules matter in CFF? Honestly, in the NFL, I think so much of what we do is sorry, I think Proton is laughing at this comment. Jesus, Proton, you're trying to get women in their mid-40s to tune in.
Guys, I have to be honest. I wanted you guys to know. I rolled into my house and sat down, plugged in, and we taped. I'm right off the Colorado River. I've been basically on a sandbar for 3 days. I haven't showered. I haven't done it. I'm here, and I am ready. So that is that counts for the gun show. I didn't have time to take off the shirt. I just came in and I just went with it. So sorry, guys.
That's amazing,
sunburns.
Man.
Thanks, man.
Sorry, I saw your reaction, Proton, and I had to just.
What am I going to say? That's funny. Sorry. All right. Back to the regularly scheduled program.
Yeah, team schedules. Honestly, in the NFL, I think there's so much parity that the schedule, the disparity, and the opponents isn't that great. But in college, man, that can be huge, particularly when we're talking about out-of-conference schedules. That's a major plus for P4 teams, and then for G5 teams, man, like the MAC, because of money, they have to schedule some pretty big Big Ten opponents, and that can really hurt them, and can really make the difference in winning a week or losing a week or just benching a player and where you might draft them. So stuff like schedules is a big deal. Playoff buys this year, we got teams with 3 buys during the entire season. We have over 30 teams that have a playoff bye in week 12 or week 13. We have an extra week this year and this season. It's one of those odd years where every team has 2 buys. So there's all sorts of reasons why in 2024 schedules matter. I want to ask you guys before we get into a deeper discussion here, how do you guys factor in schedules when you're drafting, particularly in redraft, right? We do a lot of best balls. And schedules, to me, don't matter as much there as maybe lining up some bye weeks, but that's about it. But in redraft, schedules matter to me. Do they matter to you guys, and how do they matter?
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I do with my guys, if I have a lot of guys in a similar group, similar ranking, or a tier, schedule can play a big part in that. So, for example, like Preston Stone, right? I'm pretty high on him this year as far as what he can do, but he's kind of in that mid-teens to late teens for me. And he's a guy that when you look at his schedule, he's got the 3 buys and they're moving to the ACC, which isn't necessarily a gauntlet, but it's definitely, he's going to face some tougher defenses this coming year. So he's a guy that he might fall more towards the back of that group that he would be in than maybe the front if his schedule fell a little bit differently. So I definitely factored in that way. Playoffs, I'll look at playoffs a little bit, mostly for the top tier guys, though. I don't pay too much attention to playoffs for anything outside of those top 2 to 3 tiers, just because in a redraft, I mean, if you guys are anything like me, half of your rosters, turned over by the time you get to playoff time. So it's just really trying to identify those top tier guys that have a really favorable playoff matchup and try and get a lot of shares of those guys is really how I'm trying to approach it. And the last thing I look at a lot is, what does their schedule look like compared to last year, and how do they do versus that schedule? So if these guys have a lot tougher schedule than they did last year, and they struggled last year, if I factor that in as well. So those are just a couple things that I definitely use the schedules for.
That's good. What about you, Mike?
I kind of disagree with you, Josh, in a little bit. I definitely pay attention to schedules more so in best balls than in redraft. But for redraft, I think it would depend on the league, right? If there's unlimited waivers, then I really couldn't care less about the schedule, to be honest, in a redraft. But if you have restricted, transactions, then I think it's a definite factor that you need to look at. Obviously, I am keen on the playoff schedules because, expect to be in the playoffs in most of my leagues. But, I think, and then just the one thing I've added, and I've touched on it in a previous show, like for best balls, I definitely, in particular, the quarterback position, definitely pay attention to, those early season schedules because, and just to give an example, like a Garrett Green, he plays Penn State week 1. So you're obviously going to try and want to pair him up with somebody like a Jackson Arnold who plays Temple versus maybe, you don't want to have Tommy Castellanos being your QB2 when he plays Florida State week 1 too. So then you're kind of screwed in that first week. So just kind of aligning schedules with different players, particularly in best balls, is where I'm at.
Real quick on. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, go for it, Zach.
I was going to say real quick on that point. I used that logic a lot last year for our champions draft, just lining up when I would take guys and find their holes, their buys, their tough, and try and match up a guy. So that's definitely a strategy I use in best ball, is lining up those schedules with players. In
particular, probably like for QB, again, using QB as example.
Yep.
If you're punting QB late, right, you're obviously not going to have those high-end quarterbacks who are going to get you 20, 25, 30 points consistently per week, where you really need to, if you're punting with QBs, you need to have those schedules lined up. So if this guy is having facing a tougher opponent, then your backup is obviously facing a lesser opponent.
Yeah, I play in a kind of a modified, almost best ball league. It's not best ball. Obviously, there's lineup decisions, but there's no transactions. So we do 45 rounds, 45 spots, and that's your roster to work with for the entire season, with the exception of you can trade up until week 4. So I've been sort of conditioned, and that's been my long-time home league forever. I've been conditioned because of that to make sure that every player I'm looking at, I at least have my buys in order. Some guys are going to get hurt. There's going to be depth chart moving up and down. But if I can at least square it all and put it together, I feel like I can be, I'm going to be in good shape, and I'm going to be not have to be looking at the trade market as a lifeline and say, oh my gosh, I only have 2 defenses this week, or I only have 3 wide receivers. I could use somebody to make sure I get in one of those spots. It becomes really important. So I do think that that you have to pay attention, and you have to be aware of which teams, again, are moving up, which teams are, have better schedules, up, down, all around. I'm with you. This is an exciting show, and I can't wait to see who you guys like and don't.
Yeah. No, it's going to be a fun show. Hey, Zach created a really cool spreadsheet that all of us used really as a source for looking at these teams and their schedules. and all that. And so, Zach, you put a bunch of work into this thing. So I wanted you to give us some general observations on team schedules this year and kind of what sticks out kind of from a meta perspective, overarching perspective on schedules.
Yeah. So really the first thing that pops out. So I went through and tried to develop kind of our own fantasy strength of schedule, the strength of defense that these teams are going to be playing, and use that to kind of guide some of this. And the Big Ten, which this shouldn't be much of a surprise, but they definitely have the toughest schedules when it comes to facing defenses. They had 9 of the top 10 in that strength of schedule. So the Big Ten is just going to be tough this year. AAC and Mountain West, some of the easiest schedules. No surprise there, I don't think, for any of us. But those teams really fell down towards the bottom of this list. Something else that I think we all know and we've talked about, but the teams that moved conferences, right? USC, UCLA, Washington, Oregon, Texas, Oklahoma, and SMU specifically, schedules are a lot tougher this coming year than what they've seen in the past. So I think we all expect that with those teams, but definitely something that popped up there. The teams moving from the Pac-12 to the Big 12, not really much of a difference overall. It's pretty similar strength of schedule that they've seen. And then, of course, Washington State and Oregon State, those schedules got easier. Specifically, Washington State, it's a lot easier this coming year. So just something to keep in mind. We don't know a ton about that team right now as far as who's going to start. We have an idea, but something to keep in mind as we get closer to the season. Those guys have a really easy schedule coming up. Kind of touched on this too, but the non-con. So the max non-con is tough. A lot of those teams are playing at least 2 Power 4 teams, and a lot of those teams are playing 2 Big Ten teams, or they're going Big Ten, ACC. So they really, their non-cons are up there right towards the top of the strength of schedule. Those are going to be pretty tough games. And then I think you factor that in with the MAC is just so unpredictable, at least for me when I'm doing projections. It just seems like it's always hard to predict what those guys are going to do, and add in sometimes those injury reports, right? We don't get good player info on those guys. And as I kind of been going through this, you got the toughest non-con strength of schedule. They're not predictable within their conference. Those are guys that I'm noticing I'm kind of staying away from. Not all of them. There's guys that definitely have value, but it's just a little bit harder when you factor in some of the schedule stuff. But then one thing that really stuck out to me is the Mountain West has one of the easiest non-cons. So not only are they in a conference where the defenses haven't really been as good as what we've seen in the past, they've started to kind of fall off. Their non-cons aren't that tough either. I mean, there was maybe 6 or 7 teams that play a Power 4 team and most of the time it's not a real top 10. I think the toughest defense anybody plays is Fresno. They play Michigan and UCLA. And then after that, it just drops off. New Mexico has Arizona and Auburn. CSU has Texas. But overall, the Mountain West teams just are not playing that tough of a schedule outside of maybe 1 or 2 games. And then you have your conference games as well. And to me, I think that's going to be a conference where we see some really good CFF value just because of how that non-con kind of laid out for those teams this coming season. And those are the main things that really stuck out to me as I was kind of working through a lot of this stuff. And I know we'll get into some of these teams a little bit deeper, but that at a high level that stuck out to me.
Yeah, from a conference perspective, one of the things, and like you said, you're looking at the G5, and one of the first things you're looking at is the toughest schedules, and at the bottom that are the easiest, and then how they meet in the middle and cross. That's kind of where I like, all right, where is that intersection point? And my gosh, the MAC, you can't get away from some of these schedules. And, as you were talking about, Zach, about projecting them and how it makes it difficult to kind of figure out where these MAC teams land, they weren't scoring a lot of points. In the previous pre-transfer portal era, you would see 35 points a game. Sean Lewis was at Kent State. Toledo was more potent. You're seeing more defense because the better offensive players are just transferring now. Yep. And they're just pulling them up. and they're not replacing those players with commensurate players from the FCS level. So let me put it into perspective by what I mean about just the vast differences between the G5 schedules this year. Zach touched on it. The MAC, we're going to go with number 47th ranked schedule is Miami, Ohio. Number 48th is Kent State. Number 49, Ole Miss. Number 50, Missouri. Number 51, Akron. I mean, if that doesn't kind of illustrate what we're dealing with and how hard it's going to be to really, you're going to have to make sure that your investments in the MAC, one, pay attention to their schedule and their bye weeks because they're going to be loaded. Those first 4 weeks are going to be a nightmare. They're going to be almost unusable for most of those weeks because they're all paycheck games. So that has to be accounted for. And then on the same side, man, I couldn't believe the AAC looking at their schedule strengths. A lot of those bottom 10 to 25 schedules are AAC. The worst number 134 according to our schedule matrix is Tulsa. And we already talked about Camden Benjamin. You know, we got Cobra Lagasse going over there. They don't not want to score points. That's always been one of the better AAC teams. And with SMU kicking up, with UCF already gone, Cincinnati already gone, like it's like a new look CUSA almost. It's like a juiced CUSA. And then CUSA is just pulling up from the FCS. So the fact the AAC, you know, you got Tulsa, Florida Atlantic, East Carolina, all have 3 of the top 10 easiest schedules. That's certainly something I'm going to be factoring in and pay a closer attention to those teams because all 3 of them, as we're talking about, they're fairly, you know, teams that want to score points. And in that conference, I feel like they can.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the surprises for me a little bit was how bad the Sun Belt Conference was. I mean, they were, as far as the easiest schedules go, I think you had like 5 of the bottom 7. So the easiest schedules were all from the Sun Belt, including like you got a team like JMU, you know, Coastal Carolina, South Alabama, Texas State. I mean, these are teams that we're all drafting players pretty high from, or they're teams like South Alabama that has Gio Lopez that we all think he's a pretty good value where he's going, or he could be a really good quarterback potentially. So it's interesting to me. Like there was some conferences like the Sun Belt that I was like, man, I thought it was a better defensive conference coming off of last year. It feels like, man, there's a lot of opportunity there to see some explosive offenses.
Yeah, and you mentioned the D too, James Madison. James Madison and Troy were phenomenal defenses last year. But again, you know, we kind of look at this and say, all right, well, they're playing each other, and that can kind of account for that, where the strength is just the strength of each team's. But I feel like just the talent pool in general in the SBC, just much better. I mean, it's just a lot better than the CUSA and the MAC, in my opinion, and you get better games out of it. So, you know, it's I guess it's all perspective. We'll see how the games play out, but I'm excited about talking about our favorite and least favorite schedules. See how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. Any closing thoughts, Mike, on this general observations?
No, I was just looking back, and we were talking about the MAC and all the talent that's transferring out. They in 2022 they had 6 teams average 27 points per game or more, and it was just 1 last year. It's kind of depressing.
Wow.
I love the MAC. Obviously, I'm from the area, but
what
I love
has happened to our MAC? We used to love the MAC. It used to be a honey hole. Jordan Lynch, like one of the greatest college fantasy players of all time. Antonio Brown, man, it's sad.
Yeah. I mean, it is crazy. It really is. I remember even 5 years ago, I put so much stock into just knowing G5 teams and just killing it in that area and be able to find advantages. And with NIL and, you know, papers essentially locking down content where you just can't, it's all behind paywalls or just firing their beat writers. It's like so hard to depend on G5 schools, you know, to find these edges, because as soon as you get an edge, Colin Lacey goes to the ACC or, you know, whatever, you know, and then you're like, you know, they could be good. They could be not at that level. It's just harder. It's like figuring out whether a college player is going to be good in the NFL. It's a whole different deal. So it's hard. Hey, we're going to get into teams to avoid and teams that we want to target here in a minute, but we're going to take a quick break, and then we come back. We'll start with our first team to avoid. All right. We are starting out with our first team to avoid. I am up. I picked Minnesota and low key. Who I really wanted to pick, but I was going to leave it for Froton, and he just didn't bite, was USC. Movement over there to the Big Ten. I mean, their schedule is incredibly difficult this year, and we already talked about just the problems that they're, I think, potentially had in the spring game, or how they're going to spread the ball around. But I ended up going with Minnesota, another fellow Big Ten team, and the reason for that is that their schedule, to me, is just unbelievably hard. 8 of the 12 opponents are in the top 40 as far as strength of schedule. Their non-conference strength of schedule is actually 115, and so they start off the year actually pretty easy, where they face, let me see here, I think they face UNC, and then they go FCS, and they go Nevada. And then after that, 8 of their last 9 opponents are all top 40. Their conference strength of schedule is 4th in the nation. And that includes facing a USC team that's ranked 104th overall as far as their defense. So you're talking about the other 7 conference games are just brutally hard. Their playoff opponents, they have actually a bye the first week of the playoffs. If you play, this year there's playoffs are weeks 12 through 14 because there's an extra week. And in week 12, the first week of traditional playoffs, they have a bye week. And then their week 13 and week 14 opponent are Penn State, ranked number 3, and then Wisconsin, ranked number 10. Really, Minnesota, you got Daniel Jackson as a player that you could pick later in drafts, but there's not a lot of players that you're picking up from Minnesota right now that we're seeing go. But there is one going very high in drafts, and that's Darius Taylor, who I love. He was a guy that I was on last year. He was a sleeper for me. But this guy this year has first round ADP. And so that to me is just super high for a team that has a really, really tough schedule. So I want to ask you guys this about Darius Taylor. Are you guys avoiding him just completely at his current ADP, or is he a guy that you would potentially draft early, play him for those first 3 weeks? He's going to get 30, 35 carries a game because that's what they do even against Bowling Green last year. And then try to trade him, or what are you guys doing with Darius Taylor this year?
I like Darius Taylor. I mean, in terms of the situation, we know what Minnesota wants to do. And it's funny, I actually had an interaction at the Combine where I sat with a former Minnesota offensive coordinator for like 5 hours and talked ball with him the whole time. And his comment to me was, if I was like, well, how was it being an offensive, being around Minnesota? He's like, well, if you like running power 25 times, all game long, then yeah, that's the place for you. If you're an offensive coordinator, you're just happy to do the meat and potato stuff, then great. Well, that's what PJ Fleck wants to do, is the meat and potatoes. Obviously, Ethan Kaliak-Manis, it is the quintessential addition by subtraction, sending him packing on his way. So I do think that could at least help. Where, my gosh, he was an eyesore to watch last year. It's just no accuracy or timing on his passes. So they're gonna have to run. So I'm okay with Darius Taylor just because the volume is there, and volume is like half the problem in CFF. So I'm okay with Darius Taylor, but as stated, with the way that the regional, everything has been opened up in terms of conferences, there's no more West, East, North, South, whatever you want to call it. It hurts those teams that were on the other side of the Big Ten from Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, because now, hey, guess what? You're all together, and some years you're going to get screwed. And here you are, Minnesota, dealing with it. So I'm not fading Darius Taylor. I do think he still belongs in that top 10 running backs. I feel comfortable about that. But at the same time, it doesn't help Daniel Jackson, who was their obvious bell cow receiver and got almost every pass last year. He's pretty much the only guy they could depend on. But I think it it hurts him and it hurts projection for any ancillary guys. Where Minnesota used to be a place where you get a tight end. Maybe you can get a receiver like a Rashad Bateman type. I mean, you used to have some pretty dynamic receivers, Otman Bell. That ain't the case anymore.
To me, it wasn't the schedule. It was that, I mean, and I don't disagree. The schedule is obviously incredibly tough, but Darius Taylor played in 6 games last year due to injury. And then he gets injured again during the spring. So, I mean, I'm cautious to designate anybody injury prone, but obviously that, getting injured multiple times in that time span probably isn't the best for your overall outlook. And you're just kind of reading up on Minnesota, and it's just like the writers kind of keep mentioning like, oh, did these coaches learn their lesson from last year of, avoiding, and then not just last year, 2-3 years ago with Mo Ibrahim, right? He blew out his knee or what foot or whatever.
Achilles. He dropped an Achilles.
Yeah. I mean, he obviously came back from that and scorched everybody with 35 carries a game. But you keep reading like, are these coaches going to learn their lesson? And maybe they have by bringing in Bangura from Ohio or Marcus Major from Oklahoma. They added in Jaron Mangum from Michigan State. So I don't know. To me, it's more just the options now that they have in the backfield, plus the potential injury concerns there with Darius Taylor. So I haven't drafted him, but I understand you're realistically you're looking at RB1 upside with Darius Taylor. So I don't have any issue with him going in the first round.
Yeah. What about you, Zach?
Yeah. I don't have any issues with it either. There's some other guys around that same time that maybe you can get a little bit later in that round 2, late round 3 that I like maybe a little bit better, just because a guy like, like Devin Neal, right? I guess he's going a little bit earlier, but he's got a pretty nice schedule there. So there's just some guys that are going in that same time frame, or that you can wait around later. And I like that. I still think Taylor's going to be a good pick. But to all the points we've made, I just think if you can grab a top receiver at that same spot and get another running back, in the next round, I probably like that a little bit better for me.
Yeah, and I'm a big pie guy. I like the offenses. They're going to score a lot of points too. 20 points a game last year, Minnesota. Tough. 124th in pace. Again, here we are. So, there's definitely some merit to what you're saying.
There we go. All right. The next up team we have, I believe, is Georgia Tech. Mike, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I'm not going to. This one's kind of been discussed, on other shows and multiple times throughout the offseason with college fantasy analysts. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, too. But this schedule is obviously super tough. And it's really backloaded, right? You got, I know they got Notre Dame at home. You got Miami, NC State, and then the finale with Georgia. But then there's some other caveats that kind of go into their schedule as well. You have the traditional Week 12 bye week, or I'm sorry, the traditional Week 12 start of the college fantasy playoffs. Georgia Tech has a Week 12 bye. And then you kind of look at the start of their schedule. They got Florida State in week 0, meaning they have 3 bye weeks. That Florida State game is in Ireland, so there's in week 2 they come back to the States, face Georgia State. Obviously, we expect them to win that game, but do you deal with potential jet lag coming back from Ireland? And then after that, in week 3, they face VMI. Depending on the league that you're in, that's a FCS team that that Georgia Tech faces. Does your league have a penalty deduction for facing FCS teams? So in addition to just the strength of their schedule, there's obvious factors at the beginning with the potential, coming back from Ireland, the potential point deduction, that it's just a lot. And I don't know. I personally, and I don't know where you guys stand, but I've been avoiding Georgia Tech players this year just because I don't know how likely it is that they replicate what they did last year.
Yeah, Froton, you know, I feel like you've taken Eric Singleton a little bit. Is that true in our championship series? Why don't you talk a little bit about why you've decided? I mean, because you know what the schedule's like, but you've decided to take some shots on him. What do you like about him?
Well, you got the triple. Well, when it comes to Georgia Tech, you know, we'll start there. You got the triple bye, as discussed, which is a major factor. Week 1, they're playing Florida State, or should be week 0. So you actually kind of get that game out of the way. But I feel like, you know, there are some factors here that do act as counterbalances to the schedule. One, 82.4% of their offensive production is returning. That is the 7th most returning production on the offensive side in the nation. They have 4 of 5 offensive linemen back, and they got a pretty good transfer in Keelan Rutledge to go over there and play right guard, which if you're going to need an offensive lineman, bring in a right guard. And as stated, I also like Jamal Haynes, who has dual running back, wide receiver eligibility on Fantrax. I don't know how much that stays or if that'll be augmented, but look, I mean, everybody loves dual eligibility. We talked about Toledo, how they're running back. What's his name? It's eluding me right now. Help me.
You're talking about Jacquez Stewart?
Jacquez Stewart. Yeah, Jacquez Stewart. I take him all the time. Jacquez Stewart, same thing. Running back, wide receiver eligibility. But with Georgia Tech, keep in mind, their defense stinks. And they're 85th in returning production on the defensive side from a team gave up 32 a game last year, 100th in EPA per play, getting smoked, 121st in success rate defensively. I mean, they're a sieve. And if you're going to be turning over that defense, and Brent Key is more offense-oriented anyway, the head coach, they're going to have to make up for that somehow. And the reason why we got so much fantasy production out of them last year, because they put up 29.5 a game. They're running at the 31st quickest pace in the country, 29th in EPA per play. So this is a team that can score points and has to. I don't mind seeing the bad defense. I don't mind that they're getting lit on fire in the pass game, 103rd in overall passing performance, 108th in rushing performance on the defensive side. They're simply terrible. And that's great because that means that Eric Singleton's going to get more passes because they're going to have to do something to try to get this offense started because they're going to have to be down and they're going to be chasing a lot of the time. Yes, you're absolutely right about the schedule. It's not ideal at all. I mean, if we're looking at how many games are going to be favored in, you got Georgia State, you get VMI, and you probably get Duke. I mean, maybe Syracuse. After that, Louisville, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Miami, NC State, Georgia to end up with. Georgia in the finals, NC State and Georgia, bye in week 12. They're pretty much a blank in the playoffs. So, like, you got a bye in week 12. You got Georgia week 14. Unstartable. Maybe you squeeze your guys in for NC State. But if this isn't a best ball format you're drafting and you have to go and play these guys, you got 3 blanks in the playoffs, and that's a problem.
Yeah, it's not like you make great points, and it's not an overly difficult schedule. I think it's just the timing, right? The timing of the bye week, the timing of when they face Georgia is what's troublesome for those players.
Yeah, no, totally. And I really liked your point though, Froton, about how good their offense is versus how bad their defense is. I mean, these are the type of things that you really look for in CFF, right? And so on paper, before you look at schedule, you're like, man, Georgia Tech's a team to target. Same thing with USF. They were the same way last year, right? Explosive offense, like big time offense with horrible defense. And you try to find that ground for the teams that you're going to target. Texas State is another one like that. And yet, like, just Georgia Tech, it's just like, you know, again, they're a team. I don't care as much. Obviously playoff buy and buys don't matter to me as much in best ball. But in redraft, it's just almost impossible to take them. And then, if you take whatever, any of their guys in the first 10 to 15 rounds, you cannot play them in the playoffs. And so what are we doing really? It's a blown pick, especially when you have 11 regular season weeks. And then you can only play them during 7 or 8 of them.
Yep. And you mentioned too, you bring up another good point about teams. You mentioned a few other teams that had poor defenses. And if you notice a trend, and this is sometimes it can be just as simple as looking at where the coaches, what their background is. The head coach of all those teams you mentioned is an OC hire. OCs care a lot less about defense than DCs do. If you have a DC head coach, he's going to want to protect his defense in a way that OCs just typically don't. And that is something that you can, just an easy little cheat code to be like, just out of the gate, be like, all right, these teams have offensive head coaches. You could probably expect they're not going to care about it as much as a DC. So these are all things, a little advanced game theory to kick around.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, Zach, why don't you take us on to our next team?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Wisconsin. A couple reasons why I wanted to talk about them. One, obviously, Will Pauling's getting drafted round 2, 3. Malusi's going a little bit later. Van Dyke sometimes going late. This schedule, it's a top 10. It's number 6 in our strength of schedule ranks. Their playoff, it's pretty tough. They're going to have Oregon, Nebraska, and Minnesota, so all top 25 teams there. Their non-con is at 41 and their conference is at 7. But one reason why I really wanted to talk about Wisconsin is because the schedule, I think it sets up nice early, and I think it could be a little bit of fool's gold for this team. They start out with Western Michigan, then they play South Dakota. And I think we're going to see that Wisconsin offense just really humming. And we're going to think, all right, we got some guys here. Obviously, Will Pauling's going to be on the radar already. But I'm really more thinking about Van Dyke and what he might be able to do in those games. After that, they have Alabama and a bye, and then USC. So 3 of the first 5 weeks, they have pretty favorable matchups. And I think that offense is probably going to look pretty good for the most part. And then they have Purdue, which again, I think they'll continue, but then they hit a gauntlet of all top 25 defenses the rest of the year. And you're facing Rutgers, Northwestern, Penn State, Iowa, Oregon, Nebraska, Minnesota. And I could just see, we saw the struggles that this offense had last year. And I know they brought in Van Dyke. But I think this is one where we could see them really look good early and then really fall off late, just with how the schedule sets up. And there's going to be some tough games. You think about week 9, 10, and 11 as their bye, but Penn State, Iowa, and a bye, and you're starting to get towards playoffs and possibly some must wins. And can you count on some of those guys to really get you there? And again, I think Will Pauling's probably the most relevant here, and maybe he'll do all right. But those are some defenses that have been really good against receivers as of late. So I just think this is one of those where it can be a little bit deceiving to start the year, and then it could just really come to a halt once they start to play some of these defenses.
So Zach,
yeah,
did you look at this schedule while you keep drafting Malusi in every Champions League?
I haven't been I haven't been taking him as much lately. And I will not be taking him as much going forward. But hey, I'm hoping that I get some big points week 1 and week 2 with him, and then the other guys are going to carry me through the second half of the year.
Oh man, that's amazing. I love the call out.
As the world, myself, and Moxley's there too. At least he was. I don't know if he's still holding the torch like I am, but I love Tyler Van Dyke in terms of his potential. Now, Michael and I did make, tidy little profit off of fading him when he had that gigantic knee brace on. It was clear that his plant foot was impaired, and he could not Like he couldn't gas it up the way that he could for like a good 4 or 5 week stretch until he kind of came back towards the end of last season. But I mean, his arm strength is undeniable. It's there. He tests windows across the middle. He's obviously a statue, but man, Longo, he can make that work. Tanner Mordecai was extremely limited. I mean, arm strength, not his deal. Wasn't a fit. Didn't look comfortable really at any point in that offense. I feel like a guy with more straight up arm talent that I've absolutely seen displayed on the field. You fold him into that system where Longo, took multiple quarterbacks, specifically, obviously, Howell, May, and really May had his best season with Longo. You look at 2022 Drake May and 2023 in terms of footwork. He's on his toes more in 23. He's doing the fade throws where he's going back and trying to just arm it all the way out there as opposed to channeling and using his lower body. So I feel like he is one of the guys that I never want to discount. And then when it comes to the schedule, Zach's point is completely valid about that tough middle: Rutgers, Northwestern, Penn State, Iowa. Bye. Ouch! That's a 5 weeks of what are you getting out of them? I don't know, but this is still Wisconsin. Yes, it's DC run, and I just made that point about Fickle, but those Cincinnati teams scored. It wasn't like he was afraid to score with those Cincinnati teams. He's going to have a talent edge on several teams outside of that pocket of that Rutgers, Northwestern, Penn State, Iowa. I'm not even particularly concerned about Northwestern. I mean, I know they had a good D. That David Braun is a great defensive coach, again, taking over Fitzgerald, but I'm not afraid of the back end. I'm not afraid of Oregon coming to the Big Ten against some big corn-fed farm boys, bowing up to them on the line. No offense, Zach. You got to show me something, Nebraska. I'm not going to do it again. I believed them a couple times in that Scott Frost run, and they burned me. You got to show me. And then as we talked about Minnesota at the end, which, from a talent standpoint, I feel like that's probably – that's a 10-point favorite out of Wisconsin. So I look at like games that won't be favored in. I feel like they got a battle on their hands with Penn State. Going to be low scoring. Not going to want to start a lot of them. They might not be favored against USC, but that's a game I'm not afraid of from a scoring standpoint. And then Oregon, probably a dog to Oregon. But when have they been against allowing some points? I know that they had a good defense for Pac-12 standards, but I don't know how that transpires in the Big Ten. So I do see, year two Fickle. I don't want to go and just say this is what their offense is because they scored 23 a game last year. I think they can get to 27, but you're going to have some very tough weeks when it comes to picking your starters. And it's going to be hard to go and throw out Will Pauling, who, as we discussed, I think he's overpriced where he's going right now. And I think that Zach is absolutely on the money with that.
Yeah. Bainbridge, do you have anything before I close this one out?
Nope, we can move on.
I mean, I'll say this about TVD. I think this is we're going to figure out who he is this year. I mean, anytime that teams dropped zone cover 3 against him instead of man, he struggled last year. And so, we'll see what
he was hurt a lot last. That's the thing. Like he wasn't
hurt against Georgia
Tech. At the same time, he's a statue.
or North Carolina.
Yeah. And now he's going to the Big Ten. All right. Well, yeah. Okay.
I'm just saying, I will say Phil Longo, easier, simpler offense. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I think TVD can be good. We'll see what he ends up doing at Wisconsin.
There's a lot of projection on my part with that one. Admitted.
It's all good.
Can't quit that, man.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I had to watch him for the last 2 years melt down. So it's been killing me. But all right, Froton, why don't you take us to your Froton, take us to your team real quick, and then we'll hit a break after that.
Yes, sir. All right, we're gonna go. And this one, I kind of want to reach a little deep on this one. I kind of got into my own head, and I can't help it because I'm seeing there's a lot of changes from last year. I'm going with the Florida State Seminoles, and it's an overall team play on here last year. Magical undefeated season, faded down the break, but was able to just gut it out without Jordan Travis. I mean, he was what a hearty performance by that team. But there's a lot of headwinds here. You're not getting the team that you had last year. There's no more Johnny Wilson and of course, Keon Coleman, first round pick. They aren't there anymore. Trey Benson, again, early third, late second, I forget where he was. Absolute freak, 9.9 RAS score. He's gone. Jordan Travis, injured. Heisman candidate until that happened. Like, put the team on his shoulders. He's gone. There's a lot that they have to rebuild. In fact, you could say every single skill position besides Kyle Morlock, the tight end, is turning over. So they bring in Malik Benson, and you want to talk about getting, he gets banged up. I don't know. You hear good things about camp. I've heard propaganda before. We heard propaganda last season about Malik Benson. How much we're going to do it again? Am I going to fall for it again? I don't know.
Is Josh going to fall for it again?
I don't know. Josh going to fall for it again.
I did in my last draft, so.
But it was cost of acquisition. What was it? That's the thing.
It was round 23, so, a little bit better.
Oh, well, I'm not going to ding anybody for a round 23 Malik Benson play. So you're safe there, my brother. But, 75th in terms of returning production, 57% of the returning production gone. Yeah, I know you got DJU, but okay. I mean, okay. Yeah, he was under Jonathan Smith's wing at Oregon State, which is just extremely stable, dependable. Like, you put him in the system and you can succeed. Here we go. I mean, it's on his back now because you got a three-headed running back monster, Roy Dell, Toa Philly, Jalen Lucas, who has been getting drafted. He's been getting drafted. He's little, but a man. He's there. And then you get the schedule. Georgia Tech, week 0, which doesn't count. So there's a game where they're, maybe 13, 14-point favorites off the board. You don't get anything for it. In fact, you get the dreaded third bye. Triple bye out of Florida State. So you throw out a very appealing Georgia Tech matchup, which is 32 points a game. Then Boston College, week 1. Hooray. Good matchup. Bye, week 2. Memphis, week 3. All right. Is Memphis great? No. Are they a bad team? I'd say they're probably the class of the AAC this year. I mean, for a non-con, that isn't a great non-con play. I don't want to see them playing Memphis. That's home or not. Then you get in, you welcome Cal to the ACC and then SMU. So great. I'd say so far, okay. Then we get in, then the fun starts. Clemson. Another bye number 2. Duke, changing over Manny Diaz. Okay. Still, I mean, we'll see. Miami's probably, I got Miami as a small favorite. So have fun with that.
They're in the Nebraska conversation of believe it when you see it. I know. Because we haven't seen it from Miami.
Road game to Miami. That's a tough game. I think that's fair. It's a tough game for them. Changing over. North Carolina. All right, fantasy-wise, you're going to feel pretty good about that. But then Notre Dame. And here's where where the strength of schedule and the fantasy strength of schedule sort of divest, okay? We're going to go with the last 4 weeks. Primetime. Notre Dame, as discussed, that's a nightmare. Bye. First week of the playoffs. Second week of the playoffs, Charleston Southern. That's as bad as Notre Dame, in my opinion. You think they're going to play anybody that we want to have anything to do with for too long against Charleston Southern when you got Florida, the rivalry game coming up in week 14?
And after Jordan Travis got hurt last year, if they have any sort of shot, like, are they playing anybody, after that?
No. Those FCS teams are landmines, and we need to treat them as such against these big teams. Because if you don't get it in the first half, it's not coming. So it's a real conundrum when you're dealing with that. So those last 4 weeks, there's not a good start in the bunch for the entire playoffs. You toss in the 3 buys, Clemson, Notre Dame, Miami on it. I just think that you have a lot of moving pieces. You have a very unfavorable stretch run. and you toss in a bad Charleston Southern game, there's a lot of things I don't like about this team that has a completely new skill core.
Yeah, I love what you said, partially because I just hate Florida State. So anytime anybody dogs on Florida State, it's a great day for me. I will say, man, there's a lot of things. I think you made a great point. A lot of things for them are trending in the wrong direction, at least for this year. And so we'll see what they do. But hey, we're going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to talk about our teams to target in about 15 minutes or less. And Froton, I'm going to give you the floor first to talk about Liberty when we come back.
Ooh, you know I love talking about Liberty. My team, my favorite team that is the go team, the schedule team, Liberty. I mean, what more do you want from this crew? Go down on the CUSA after playing, a half and half P5, G5 schedule, maybe a 5 and 7. And then they go right down the CUSA and they just get served up just layup after layup. My gosh, putting up 40 a game. Caden Salter is a top 3 QB all over the board. You got to respect it. Quentin Cooley's back. Yeah, sure. CJ Daniels is gone, but I like Treon Sibley. I got a couple Treon Sibley shares. Okay. Another guy, quietly Treon Sibley, running back, wide receiver, dual eligibility. We all like that, especially in our best ball formats. But let's get to the schedule, right? We know how powerful Liberty is. We know that they're going to go out there and just absolutely smoke teams. And what I really like about them is how efficient they are. In terms of pace per second, 28 and a half seconds per play. That's 99th in terms of pace. They don't go particularly quick. They're not trying to go quick, but they rip off a ton of plays. 24th in plays per game with 71. And the reason why is because this is a well-oiled machine that rolls team after team. And you look at just across the board, their metrics. They're top 10 in every single important advanced metric you want to look at. You want to go yards per play, 7 yards per play, 7th nationally. We talked about the points. Yards per pass, 9.6 yards per pass, 4th in the country. EPA per play, 3rd in the country. 54% success rate, also 3rd. This is as good as you're going to get system-wise. That's what you got. And then you go to the schedule and you just start laughing at who set this up and what kind of a sadist is out there putting this thing together. Week 1, Campbell, not Pete Campbell, all right, for the Madman fans out there. Not Great Bob, right? That's Pete Campbell. New Mexico State, 2. UTEP, 3. Then we got Eastern Carolina and Appalachian State, 4-5. What's the problem here? I mean, Appy, okay, they've got a backbone. I still think they're probably at least 4 or 5 point favorite there. I mean, it's an away game. That's probably as tough as it gets. You got weird buys is all they got. Buy after Appy, FIU, Dream, another buy. It's weird. Buy, game, buy. And then you finish off with 5 straight, which is nice. And it's real nice. Kennesaw Mountain State, welcome. Welcome to the FBS. Come down. Probably a 30-point dog. Jacksonville State, another newcomer. Middle Tennessee, shootout city. They don't play D. UMass, my alma mater. Do I need to tell you anymore? Western Kentucky, Sam Houston. Every single one of those games is a double digit, or at least 8-9. It's more than a touchdown favorite. I don't see a single game on this schedule that they aren't prohibitive favorites, except for Appy. That's still 3, 4, maybe it gets up to 5. Liberty is going to ruin teams. And the fact that CJ Daniels is gone presents a buying opportunity in that wide receiver room. I'll be paying close attention, as I'm sure we all will, in summer camp. Who's getting the buzz? Who's the wideout getting the buzz? That's what we want to know. Do your homework. Follow Liberty. Tyson Mobley, Treon Sibley, Reese Smith. Who's it going to be? Do not ignore this team. And you got good value potential at wide receiver if you can hit. All about Liberty this year.
I think the only downside with Liberty is, and I wonder if the head coach or whoever sets up the schedule, they don't have an opportunity, I don't think, with the schedule to get into the playoff. They'll probably go undefeated, right? There are no games on that schedule, which it works out great for college fantasy, but there's no prove-it game, right, against a P4 opponent there. So I think that's the only downside from a Liberty standpoint.
They could frankly go and run the table and then just say, give us AAC time, but bring us in the AAC. And then they'd probably try the same thing that SMU does, but I don't know. I don't know how all the academics work. Don't ask me. I know that they're running afoul of other institutions. I have no idea what the hell they teach, but I apologize. Sorry, guys, I should probably know more about the academic curriculum of Liberty, but say la vie. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah, we'll let sleeping dogs lie there.
Right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Liberty, I mean, on our schedule matrix that Zach created, it's all green. I mean, it's a heat map and it's all green. I mean, this is about as sweet as it gets as far as schedules go. Sure. So we love Liberty here. I mean, they're fantasy winner. I mean, Caden Salter was incredible last year. Looks like he'll follow that up this year. Hey, Mike, why don't you tell us about Virginia Tech, your team to target this year?
Yeah, I'm excited for Virginia Tech. I think there may not be another team, with more optimism, I guess you could say, or excitement than Virginia Tech coming in this year. They're number one in the country in offensive returning production. I think they're top 5 in overall returning production. Obviously, played well down the stretch, winning 5 out of their last 7 games, had a dominant bowl victory over Tulane. And they have some top tier fantasy players that we're interested in Kyron Drones and Bishal Tootin in the backfield. And I think the strength of schedule is important, in particular to Drones, because it was very noticeable last year when he did not play well. And it was against, the better defenses on the schedule, right? Florida State, Louisville, and NC State.
Yep.
You look at their schedule this year, I mean, outside of at Miami, maybe, and then Clemson, what game are they not going to be favored in? And I want to speak to my point kind of last week when I was talking about Ole Miss and how they're going to have to crank it up scoring wise because, they're going to be in the hunt for that college football playoff, want to impress the voters and everything like that. I think the same thing can be said for Virginia Tech here. Just with all the returning pieces that they have, I think it really sets up nicely. Their non-conference is cake. You get at Vanderbilt, Marshall, at Old Dominion. Rutgers is a top 20 defense for S&P Plus, but you get Rutgers at home. And then you close out the season with Duke and Virginia after the bye week. Like those could be they have some skill talent offensively, so they could probably push Virginia Tech a little bit to where their starters have to be available in the 3rd and 4th quarter. So just really like the way that schedule sets up for them. There's really not a challenging defense, in my opinion, outside of Clemson on their schedule. You do have the dreaded week 12 bye week, but you can manage it. And then the week 13, once you get into the semifinals, week 13 and 14 are cake for Virginia Tech. So I like where they sit this year.
Wow. Chris K is out there in the ether somewhere, and he's very happy with you, Michael. I know that. Virginia Tech, 91% of their offensive production returning on the offensive side of the ball. Wow. The one concern I have, and I've kind of voiced it a little bit before, is just keeping Kyron Drones upright. He's a big boy. He's listed at 6'2", 231, and that's a good thing. So he can kind of absorb the contact. But I mean, a lot of his value is derived from his ability to run. He only threw for 2,080 yards last year. And as you said, you got Allie Jennings there, Daquan Felton. They're both a couple of pretty talented receivers. My question, I guess, for you guys, and I guess Mike, since he brought it up, who do you see? Do you do you prefer Felton or Jennings in that particular room, or either? Considering that they have a pretty good path and that you figure those passing numbers will improve.
I don't think, beyond round 25, I don't think you're drafting any of them. I think they don't throw the ball enough to where, if there is one guy, then maybe he's valuable, right? But you have 3 talented receivers. They got Jalen Lane too. He's back.
Sorry.
So you got 3 equally talented receivers, plus a team that probably throws the ball on 40% of the time. Like, to me, that there's nobody's going to stick out as somebody that you can start on a weekly basis. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, sure. And again, this is Brent Pry, and former Penn State defensive coordinator. They run at a 95th pace in the country. They're not out there looking to be the air raid, zip it up. They're all offense. They have an excellent defense. And if that's maybe just the one thing where they're not going to be as aggressive as probably some of the other teams, as discussed, who have more poor defenses. So, but at the same time, 28 points a game last year, on the way up. Everybody's back, essentially. No reason why they can't get in the low 30s. If they're in the low 30s, well, here comes Kyron Drones.
Do you think they can make the playoff?
No.
Wow, that'd be a big jump.
Nah, they can't beat Clemson.
Who's scary on that schedule?
I mean, they're not going to be. Did they play Clemson?
They Clemson at home.
They play Clemson. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
I told you, Miami. Prove it to me.
Yeah, Rutgers. I don't think they beat Rutgers
at home.
I like Rutgers. Rutgers.
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna. Yeah, and I don't
see what Georgia Tech. I'm not ready to bury
even Georgia Tech.
We know who Rutgers quarterback is because we just mentioned him.
Ethan Kaliak-Miss.
I mean,
the reality drones in that matchup.
The reality is that Kyron Drones is, while good at fantasy, is not a very good quarterback.
Correct.
I mean, he does not make that offense dynamic. So a good defense coordinator will scheme up and be able to
a true solo threat. He's a solo threat. And that's dangerous.
I mean,
that's why
the reality is like he was this close. He was this close to getting benched earlier in the year when he was struggling against those defenses.
I'm just saying,
he only got the job because Grant Wells got hurt. I mean, let's not talk about Kyron Drones like he's a playoff quarterback.
Through 1 pass the first game, the 7 passes the second game, he completed 2 of them.
Yeah,
he was fortunate in that sense. But hey,
if you, I think they'll beat Rutgers at home. I really do. So you're telling me all they have to do is split between Miami and Clemson. You're 11-1 in the ACC.
Yeah, you're in the championship.
Then you got to do it again, though.
Just saying.
In the championship.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
it could. But
we'll give you the benefit of the doubt because you're amazing, Mike.
I'd be interested what the odds are on that. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I'm curious what our local favorite domestic sports books are lining that up. But
we'll ask Chris K after the show.
Good. I know K is screaming right now. He's saying it's an X. Yeah, right.
All right, Zach, you and we got to be efficient here, man.
All right.
So I'm gonna let you go with Kansas, and then I'll hit up Texas State very quickly at the end.
All right. So Kansas, they have one of the easier strength of schedules for Power 4, right around 67. I love their playoff schedule. I'll get to that in a second. Non-con, again, right at 63. It's one of the easier ones for us. It's about middle of the pack, not easier. Sorry. It's middle of the pack. They start out the season with FCS, then they got Illinois, and then UNLV. I don't mind that. The playoffs is BYU, Colorado, and Baylor. I love that. And the one thing I actually really love about this whole schedule is they only play one top 20 defense in Iowa State. That's at home. They also have Kansas State on the road, which could be tough. And then the only other team that really hits in the top 50 is TCU, who was one of the worst defenses against the run last year. And the one thing I really like about this Kansas schedule is I think they can be competitive in all of these games. I think it's a team it's on the rise, but every single team gives up points to running backs that they play this year. And so for me, Devin Neal, stock up with a schedule like this because every single defense gives up points to running backs, and I love it. Jalen Daniels, I think there could be some upside if he can stay healthy with this schedule. So I think he could be a nice value at points in the season. But again, I pick these guys because I just love what it sets up for Devin Neal this year.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, the running attack with Lance Leopold is always going to be very strong. I love your points. My team, Texas State, I mean, pretty obvious reasons, dynamic, kind of to Froton's point, right? They have an OC as the head coach. Their out-of-conference schedule is ranked 96. Their in-conference schedule is ranked 125 overall. Their strength of schedule is 128. Their playoff strength of schedule is 123. And I think they play, Southern Mississippi, Georgia State, and South Alabama. I mean, all sets up really well. They have plenty of options for you to choose from Jordan McLeod, Ishmael Mahdi, and then Joey Hobart, and then Cole Wilson. So Texas State, good team to target as well. And that takes us to the end of our show. We actually, a couple of things here I wanted to point out to you guys. One, we're going to be putting out some graphics this week for you guys on schedule. So as you're kind of following along with the show this week, if you weren't with us live tonight, we're going to put out teams that have three buys during the season. We're going to put out a graphic on that, and then a graphic that includes teams that have playoff buys, so that you guys can be prepared for that and have those for yourself. If you want Zach's schedule matrix, we're going to put that out eventually on Fantasy Points, probably in the next few weeks or so, in some form for you guys to be able to have. Hey, Mike, real quick, when are you guys releasing your preseason guide?
Yeah, June 17th at the CFF site. If you guys are interested in another piece of content, we put out our yearly fantasy guide, projections, all the good stuff. So June 17th, I'm 120 team previews done right now. Got about 14 left. So we're trying to crank them out while prepare for a wedding. So it's been challenging, but good time. So appreciate it. Thanks, Josh, for setting that up. But I appreciate it if you guys check that out for more college fantasy content.
Well, we'll keep promoting that even while you're probably out most of June, but I want to give you the chance to do that, and we'll promote it when you're not on the show too, because you're getting married June 21st.
Yeah, it's coming up here.
1 month.
So Mike will be in and out of the show, maybe more out than in over this next month, but we'll be hanging out on June 21st. But June 17th, man, you're cutting it close.
Yeah, you'll be hanging out, Josh. I think you could. It's official. You will be hanging out at Mike's wedding in a way.
Yes, I'll be officiating the wedding. So, and then hey, look, Froton and Zach and I are doing a guide as well. We're gonna do a free guide here at Fantasy Points. We're gonna put out some just a basic primer on CFF with some profiles. Nothing as extensive as Mike, but something that you guys want to be looking out probably around the same time. We're actually trying. I thought you were going to be releasing yours around Memorial Day. So I thought I was teeing you up for this weekend.
No, transfer portal, man. I had to wait. I mean, my God, Rashad Amos. Hey, you chose another school during this podcast.
Yeah. Well, hey.
And before we get out, just wanted to say thanks to everybody who comments. Several of the guys, Steve Jackson, a legend, Shane Whitted, of course, always, Dan, our boy Ryan Carps, who's doing the Lord's work with his best balls. Everybody, if you're looking to get into a best ball, go to Ryan Carp 926. Ryan G 926 hit his best ball leagues, doing the Lord's work. Thank you, all the guys, Man-Made Maker, all of you. Thank you very much for listening, and we love y'all.
Yes, appreciate it, y'all. Hey. Next month is Dynasty month. So we're going to be having a whole month worth of content around Dynasty. We're looking at freshmen next week. And so if you're into Dynasty and that sort of thing, join us next week. Until then, do small things with great love.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.